So good morning, Sunit. Good morning and welcome everybody to another edition of the IESA Knowledge Series webinar. Today we are privileged to have Sunit Rikhi. Just to do a quick introduction, Sunit is an executive with over 40 years of experience in the semiconductor industry, so he's kind of a veteran in this industry. He spent close to 3 decades with Intel as Vice President and General Manager of Intel Custom Foundry during his Intel career. Sunit has played leadership roles in technology development, including physical EDA, mask operations, factory automation, advanced design, and the foundry business. So pretty much everything associated with semiconductor manufacturing and production. Since his retirement from Intel, Sunit has been involved with several young companies in roles such as non-executive director, advisor, and executive consultant. Sunit, in terms of qualification, received his MSEE from the University of Washington, and he's an alumni of BITS Pilani in India. So it's a privilege to have you here, Mr. Rikhi, and we're looking forward to hear from you on the topic, which is navigating India's semiconductor mission in the currents of the global semiconductor industry. A very relevant topic, and Sunit, over to you. Looking forward to hear your views and perspectives.
Thank you. That was generous. I assume I can start. I'll start with sharing the presentation. I assume you can see.
Yes, Sunit, we can see the screen.
Okay, thank you all who are attending. I know time is valuable, and it is my desire to make it useful for you. And it is also my desire to make it useful for me, because I'm not new to Bangalore. I've roamed the Bangalore quite a bit in my active career as well as in my post-Intel career. And this is the nth time I'm visiting, and I hope to learn a lot. It's always a pleasure. The topic I'm covering is, as stated, India semiconductors in the context of global semiconductors. A relevant topic, I know, because the corridors of semiconductor industry in India are abuzz with what opportunity we are sitting on right now. And my intent is to share some observations and questions to think through. But it is not my intent to provide an education type of a talk by painting high resolution pictures of markets and technologies. I'm assuming quite a familiarity with the semiconductor industry among the audience today. Moving forward, the talk is divided roughly into three main categories. One, I'll begin by describing the currents as I see them, both global as well as in India. Then I'll go through and talk about goals. That is a favorite topic of mine. And then end with some observations of the culture required to maximize the success potential of the current initiatives that we are all sitting on. So with that, let me jump into global currents as I see them. The semiconductor industry has attained strategic importance globally. And this is really an interesting point in time, because I remember we a while ago, I think about 10, 15 years ago, a very respected colleague of mine ran into me and asked me what I was doing swimming with electrons in deep in the bowels of Intel's technology and manufacturing group, because to him it seemed natural that everybody was moving up the stack, chasing value in software and services, and hardware was being, quote, commoditized. Um, he was dead wrong at that time and is still. The difference is that many things have happened that have made the strategic importance of semiconductors evident to a lot more people than I ever imagined. Uh, One reason is, the proliferation of semiconductors has crossed the threshold of critical significance in daily lives. So everyone who's holding a phone or some gadget or maybe has something inside their bodies that represents electronics knows what transistors are at some level and how critical they are in making the software run. Of course, recent COVID-19 raised the demand curve by a step function. You look at 2019 data, you look at 20 and 21, you see the step function, and also has exposed vulnerabilities in supply networks. Countries, of course, are seeking a new balance between globalization and localization and are very interested. Governments representing these countries are placing significant bets to improve their position in the global landscape. So those are the currents that I see that affect semiconductor industry today globally. In the in the technologies, the currents in the so that was business. In the technology side, um, there is a continuation of the march to an increasingly difficult pathway, and the intensity of both R&D and capital is staggering, uh, and naturally leads to consolidation in manufacturing, which continues. There are several slides that are very nice, which I decided not to include because it would have made that quite more educational than the simple observation, which is that manufacturing is getting more and more consolidated and concentrated in the hands of the few, uh, both in terms of industry leaders as well as governments or countries. There are significant changes in manufacturing competitive positions. You don't have to look beyond Intel to see how the tables have been rearranged and Intel has lost its once touted technology leadership and is currently doing everything possible to regain it by 2025. But such significant shifts in competitive positions are a sign that things are moving fast, things are getting difficult, and the intensity of R&D and capital is very much at play in determining what who and what wins. Of course, for a long time, we've seen the coronation of the fabless foundry business model. The IDMs are not only fewer, they are forced to define themselves in the context of new versions like IDM 2.0. But fabless foundry model has accelerated the innovation in design beyond belief, and it reigns as king. There is a shift from general purpose computing to application specific optimizations in semiconductors. And in that lies a whole bunch of implications in terms of technology optimizations or technology tuning for the various workloads, application specific workloads, and provides a significant room for competitors to differentiate based on how they optimize application specific workloads in semiconductor components they manufacture. And packaging, a long time ago, packaging was one of those things. It says packaging technology, and we in wafer technology manufacturing and technology development used to laugh at packaging as being just another small thing that has to be done. Um, it's no longer true. Packaging technologies are incubating innovations that are unprecedented, and they're all aimed at enabling optimizations in the integration of components. Today, whatever we hold in our hands or in our bodies um, is a phenomenal example of the role of packaging technologies in bringing different and diverse silicon components together in very creative and efficient and optimized ways. And all that is a result from packaging technologies innovation that has gone on for the last, say, 10 years or a little bit more. So those are the global currents in technologies. And I want to now move on to the next section, which is about goals. So let me start by saying that when you look at India semiconductors and I and I scan what has been stated in terms of what comes close to an expression of a vision or an expression of a goal, uh, these words are, I'm sure, not new to you. Self-reliance, vibrant ecosystems, global electronics hub, and then my own words, which is India has the responsibility to not only become relevant in the global semiconductor industry, but a significant global player. Um, these are all good because they represent an idea or a collection of ideas, but they are insufficient because the question is, what does this mean in tangible terms? When I look at India 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, um, what would vibrancy look like? What would being a global electronics hub look like? What would relevance and significance look like? And how will we know we have achieved success? Um, this is important because I have talked to many people who are thinkers and even government people who are uh, making a significant and serious attempt to mount this horse. Um, they are quite articulate about all these terms I've described on the slide, but they struggle to even to figure out how to answer this question, which is how will we know we have achieved success? So there are many ways, I'm sure, to quantify, to make it tangible. I'm only choosing one, and as I flip the slide, you will see that the one I'm choosing is is a goal that says get out of the other bucket. To me, it's tangible. I'll just show you how it can be made tangible. But um, I picked a 2019 data, which I have the most trust in. The 20 and 21 data is available. The overall semiconductor market looks not clearly and safely north of 500 billion. Right now, this table shows 412. But the market segment share percentage in the last column is not quite different from what you are seeing here. I mean, if you look at 2021 and 2019, you won't see much difference, with USA commanding 47%, and down the line with Korea, EU, Japan, Taiwan, and China. And then there is an other bucket of 3%. This is where India is today. And one tangible goal could be to say, in the charts like this in the future, I want to see India as a row. Simple goal. So what does that mean? It means that the MSS of India would be about 5%. I mean, China is 5%. If it could get out of the other bucket, I say India can be added there. And to understand what that 5% means, let's look at 20 years, 1999 to 2019. China went from 0 to 5. Taiwan went from 3 to 6. Japan, by the way, went down significantly from 27 to 10. Korea was very impressive from 8 to 19. And that is the picture. It shows what it takes. It's decades to build incremental small numbers in the right hand column. So let's say we envision 2030 as a $1 trillion market. India is 3%. I didn't say 5 because 2020 is only 8 years, 2030 is only 8 years from now. So I said, let's kind of halve it and say maybe we'll get to 5-6%, maybe even more in by 2040. But 2030, $1 trillion market, 3%, India is making $30 billion of its fair share of the world's revenue. And that sounds like a reasonable goal, but it's not. I mean, it's easier said than done. Yeah, there are many issues that impact India, a new entrant trying to get out the quote other bucket and uh, uh, claim it's 3% in 8 years. So let me show you one thought stream that I had about how difficult that goal is. And this is a challenge of addressability of the market because of the market segmentation. So you look at market segmentation and you say, what if I just focus on manufacturing? Well, manufacturing in total is about 22% of the 1 trillion market. And that's about 220 billion going to all the players who are um, manufacturing semiconductor components, whether they are doing wafer manufacturing or package assembly and test. And if we stick to that and we say our $30 billion goal would require us to claim 14% of this manufacturing TAM, and it suddenly the 3% looks big. Then another segmentation is nodes. So there is quite a bit of talk about what nodes are relevant and of significance, and that we should shoot for. So in 2021 already, everything less than the 28 or lower or more advanced than the 28 nanometer node is more than 50% of capacity. And this is not revenue, just a warning. I want to make sure we understand its capacity. And those high-end nodes, the advanced nodes, command the most revenue. So the revenue of going to less than 28 nanometer nodes exceeds 51%. But this is just because capacity numbers are easier to obtain. I'm using capacity numbers. And then our favorite nodes of 65 nanometer to 28 nanometer take 15% of the capacity, and the remaining capacity is all absorbed by nodes that are older than 65 nanometer. So if I take a goal of just focusing on 28 nanometer to 65 nanometer and say, that's where I'm focusing, and I'm not going to chase the leading edge nodes. And then I'm talking about getting 20% of that 28 nanometer to 65 nanometer TAM, which makes it very difficult if I choose only to focus on 28 to 65. Now, having said that, I also warn there are some applications to the government which talk about why 28 nanometer is the right node to acquire, and the reasoning is that it is stable and it's a node where much of the design is parked. All those who don't need to chase the giddying heights of advanced nodes have chosen 28. Well, the trap is that 28 was not always that. Prior to its parked node or stable node status, 65 nanometer was the node. And by the time 2030 happens, one better start looking at the next node where there is a sweet spot for all those people who are not chasing the leading edge. And that might be 10. So there is a trap that comes from assuming that 28 will always be the node of choice when parking on feature size, and that's something we need to avoid. The next segmentation is based on product type. 54% is non-memory, and I chose non-memory because it includes a very large section called logic, and a smaller, about 13% of the 54% listed here is analog. So that's why I chose non-memory. And then you have memory, and then you have all others that are esoteric and exotic and specialty technologies and all that, specialty products and all that. So if there's a very important decision to be made. Where should we go? And I think naturally we will tend to not go towards memory for various reasons. One, it's not the biggest chunk here, and two, margins are not as lucrative as the non-memory side of it. So there, the $30 billion goal that I described on the previous slide, which was 3% of the overall TAM, translates to 6% of the non-memory TAM. So bottom line is, we are talking about not a small percent, and you have already seen what it took China and Taiwan to build up to their current 5 and 6%. So that's what happened. That's the end of my thought process in terms of trying to make a tangible goal in the form of taking our fair share of revenues and trying to figure out what that would mean in terms of the decisions that need to be made about manufacturing, about feature sizes, and about product types we enter into. Next slide is starts the culture shifts, and I want to start with talking about India. So this is another question I ask everyone I can and I meet in India, and lots of people have lots of good thoughts about it. I'm sure you, the attendees, have a lot of good thoughts about it, but this is my summary of what I think we have learned from 40 years of false starts. It is staggering to see that we have been trying to enter into the semiconductor market for 4 decades. And at the start of it was SCL, 1983/1984. And at that time, I was in the Silicon Valley working for a company called AMI. And these folks from SCL came to take a transfer and ownership of 5-micron technology that they had licensed from us. And they ran into problems. They had a fire. They went about. I'm so glad they are not extinguished yet. I mean, they have recently made their way from ISRO to MITI, and it is my hope that they will find a very relevant and vibrant work in this current initiative. But that first one in 83 started 40 years of false starts. I mean, there are many, 2016, 2019, there's all kinds of initiatives that started and just, frittered away. One learning is it's not about getting a fab. There were many news articles which said India is going to get a fab. India, HSMC is going to put a fab in India. It's not about a fab. It's about building an ecosystem. And I know that the current industry represented you and the government has learned this very clearly. I mean, it shows in everything that we read on the web. Significant and sustained investments that are supported by long-term stable policies is very important. It's not very clear to me that that has been fully internalized. All you have to do is to look at Taiwan to see how they built a manufacturing base since 1984. That's 40 years. TSMC is not what it is because um, they did something really interesting in the last 10 years. They did something really interesting over the last 40 years. Requires stable long-term policies, investments. The next one is it's not the money of the government that's most important. It is important, but it is not the money. It is an active facilitation role that ties everything together from research to IP rights to infrastructure to talent and business enablement. That's a that's easy to write, but the learning and internalization of what that government role can and should be comes with experience. You know, and I think this is a major thing which India is going to learn as it takes these steps forward, and tries to make something out of the $10 billion initiative. There's of course, a long-term sustained execution to stay on the treadmill. And what this means is that, you know, we are not going to be, this thing cannot be driven by slogans. It has to be driven by sweat. And the sooner we realize it, the better. The last one is there have to be people who are crazy enough to innovate and and do unimaginable things to fight two major issues that we are facing. One, the greenfield effect. The greenfield effect essentially says Intel is so greenfield that it everybody knows it will take a long time or a substantial time to figure out how to build the minimum level of ecosystem that makes it worth it. The initial people who come in are going to have to bear the burden of the green field, and how we incentivize that, how we enable that, how we figure out uh, how the industry as a whole can help that, those initial innovators, uh, will be key. And the global currents is also an issue because, as I said, in the global currents, countries are making bets. 52 billion in the US, 11 billion with industry contributing the remaining, which makes it 43 in the EU. Samsung and South Korea and Taiwan is famous for long-term investments. They are not slowing down, they are only increasing. And there are hubs already. You know, when you think package assembly test, you know, the word that comes to your mind is Malaysia. I mean, you know, so it's, you know, the greenfield and the global desire to rearrange supply chains to their advantage, adding, you know, with Intel going to the Silicon quote heartland in Ohio, it's very difficult to even though $10 billion have been placed by India on the table, it's very difficult to attract these same players who are um, you know, swimming in their own global currents, that doesn't really make it that lucrative to come and, you know, set up shop in a green field. So some crazy innovators need to be to take you know, place some big bets. One example of this that I have is I always ask, you know, when people say we don't really need leading edge, 28 nanometers should be sufficient. And to be fair and honest, yes, I mean, 28 nanometer might be the right one to start with, but it is to start with. I would love to get these people who have given their lives developing nanoscale technology to come and say, I want to fight at the leading edge. Let's figure out how to turn SCL into a sub 100 nanometer uh, technology innovation, or sub 28 nanometer technology innovation. And yes, it's a fool's errand, but I'm a proud fool. That's the sentiment I want to express in this. But these are my learnings, and I'm sure something important in your mind has not made the cut in these bullets, but it's a complex subject to make sure we understand how we are going to do things differently so we don't repeat 40 years of false starts. Next slide is a favorite of mine. It is not quite Sunlin Chow's slide, but Dr. Sunlin Chow originally introduced this slide to make a very important point, and that is in any technology pipeline, there are three major generations that are at play. Starting from the right side, there is a GN, that's the nth generation. It's in manufacturing. Moving left, there is a N plus 1, which is in development, and then there is a N plus 2, which is in research. The dollars that these beasts require is to, 10 to the power of 8, 9, and 10, respectively. Now I'm moving left to right, sorry. But, uh, these numbers show why there are so few people and why there is so much apprehension about manufacturing investments necessary. But it's not just the manufacturing investments, it's the development and research. Of course, it's an order of magnitude less as you move from right to left, but it is not small, even to the leftmost column. The risk appetite is highest in the left column because the dollars involved are smaller and there is time to make changes. Then it goes to moderate, and then it goes to manufacturing, where the risk appetite is very low, where one excursion can make the difference between an entire $10 billion fab um, being successful and crashing like a failure. So it's natural that the risk appetite in manufacturing is very low. Um, the technology focus in research is on evaluation of multiple options. It's integration in development, because everything, you can have the best modules in technology, but they are no good unless integrated into a holistic technology node. And the focus of technology in manufacturing is replication in manufacturing, because once you have it in manufacturing, there's always good reasons to transfer and replicate. And this is, by the way, where the term copy exactly in Intel comes from. It comes from that technology focus of replicate. Management focuses in research on betting, um, in development on synchronizing efforts, because there is such a diversity of skills and domains that all have to come together at various synchronization points and make technology useful and delivered on time. And of course, in manufacturing, management focus is all about control, no excursions. Key partners in research, there is a very important role of academia. And in India, the role of an academia base, a development base, and manufacturing are all intertwined and tied in this pipeline of technology development. And nothing stays constant. Today's GN plus 2 will become GN tomorrow, and it requires consistent and continuous investment in the pipeline. So while you can license and replicate a GN technology such as 28 nanometer, that is just the beginning. Because the moment you replicate and then rest on those on your laurels there, it is the moment of starting another false start. This is just my way of looking at the ecosystem. On the left side is all blue, and blue is I've designated to design. And on the right side is all red, and that's manufacturing, whether it's wafer or packaging assembly. Um, there are many boxes that show the different types of players in the ecosystem. And I tried to say, knowing what I know, and that is not much, I tend to learn a lot more about India, but knowing what I know, uh, the boxes that are surrounded with these black boundaries are the ones that ought to be priority. So design IP blocks and design services. I didn't put talent there because I'm convinced that India has plenty of design talent. I mean, that is the least of its problems. So that is the reason why I didn't put a box around it. Of course, foundry services, PAT services, that goes without saying. This is the greenfield effect. Talent is a big deal because the kind of talent you need for technology and foundry services is not the same as the blue side. So talent is important. And of course, one of the things that really is forgotten is how you build facilities. And there are countries that have, figured this out so well that they make it look easy. But for a green field like India, we better understand what it takes to build and run facilities that support manufacturing. So that's the reason I made that rectangle border. So I think I'm ready to um, summarize, and I'm really looking forward to Q&A. So in summary, semiconductors have attained strategic importance around the globe, and success will depend on setting tangible goals and strategies, moving beyond slogans, um, placing big, risky bets, cultivating an innovation culture and persistence of uh, mission over decades. And of course, effective partnerships with government playing a significant facilitative role in government, industry, and academia partnerships. So with that, I thank you, and I hope I did not consume too much time.
Thank you, Sunit, for the very insightful observations that you have. We have a lot of questions, but I think it was very concise the way you have articulated your perspective, especially around the currents, the global undercurrents, and as well as the, without you saying it, even the geopolitical situation, which actually impacts the opportunity space. There's one question on, in terms of timing for India, considering all the global currents, whether it's around consolidation and also around the geopolitical situation. What is your perception on the timing? Is this the right time for India to grab the opportunity to create that ecosystem for manufacturing?
Well, I don't think the answer is yes or no. I think the right time was any time in the last 4 decades. It is it the more we don't act, the more we are saying we are missing the boat. um, you will find some saying we have missed the boat and actually we should stop this and invest more in systems where there's still uh, some benefit. And then, you point any country to me that says that country is Atmanirbhar in semiconductors, and I laugh at you because there is nobody. So, uh, you know, sometimes I wake up thinking uh, it's not the right time and it'll never be. But then you ask yourself, I mean, it is strategic. I mean, it is highly relevant. And the more we look at it, the more we are moving towards high tech integrated into life. And we need to own some of it. And, why not? Why not go down to the transistor level and say, I have what it takes. I did everything. I mean, look at the innovation that exists in Intel in terms of the new ways in which you deliver stuff in under 19 minutes, and you are better than anybody else in doing e-commerce and all that stuff. So I refuse to believe that India can't have the right talent and the right energy force to make a significant dent in the semiconductor market. And by the way, it might help us in innovating up and down the stack if we control a little bit more significantly the lower portions of the stack. So it is the right time. Anytime you can do it is the right time. I think that for the industry, it might be the right time because governments are so sensitized. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, 5 years ago, if I had visited Bangalore and you and I had some coffee together and somebody said, hey, the government is going to invest 10 billion, we would have laughed. But they are serious. So, in this seriousness, I, I tend to say, yeah, it is the right time. I'm sorry, I couldn't give an answer.
No, I
That,
think so. I think what you're to summarize what you're saying is this is the right time, and there is basically intent from the government, and we are seeing also global currents also favoring. The winds are in favor of what we have to do, and also I think the important part is the clarity in which you have articulated what is it, what kind of product line makes more sense. Your thoughts on whether we should look at the bleeding edge, or should we focus on maybe downstream in terms of nodes? Where is it that we should focus? And also that it's time that we build the ecosystem to create that sustained possibility for success. So I'm going to pick a few questions from the audience. Some of these you may have answered, but they are being questioned. The questions are in a different flavor. One of them is where should India start from in order to get to the status of an independent row, the row in your MSS table? Uh, should we focus on chips for, this is more from an application standpoint, should we focus on creating chips for IT hardware, embedded devices, generic semiconductor parts, or should we focus on auxiliary services such as ATMP, OSAT, etc.? I know you answered some of it, but it's just a different flavor from
yeah.
the audience question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think at least without knowing the details of the Indian market, and I haven't been able to, understand. But from where I sit, I think logic would be definitely my choice. Within logic, I wouldn't discriminate. You want logic, I'll give you logic. You're making AI chips, and AI chips for sure. I mean, there's a lot of innovation that is possible in terms of doing fabless design companies in India that utilize logic. But I would say try and build and support, maybe collaborate on new ways. Like I said, there is application specific optimizations that are going into semiconductor components. I would latch on to that and I would go for it. I would I think investing in saying let me get BAT services is not at all sexy to me. It basically, this is where I say, we need to be a little bolder. if we get the first I'm not saying we should reject pat. I'm just saying let's not get enamored by the idea that we should focus on pat because that's what's left on the table and that's easier to do and all that. that that's not my idea of spiraling into an energetic cycle of semiconductors in India.
Yeah, thanks for that. Actually, the follow-up question was related. It's related to Indian design startups. We see a lot of traction and momentum, especially in the design space, from Indian companies who are innovating on many of the areas that you just mentioned, including AI and many other bleeding edge areas. So, what do you think the design industry in India should do while we are trying to build in parallel this ecosystem? In your priority chart, which you had, the left side, the blue, talked about design services, and the right side was the core manufacturing. So, what
Right.
do you think is the interrelationship between the two? That's the question.
Yeah, so
What
I
should
think
we?
the design ecosystem in India should simply uh, go at top speed and become relevant just on their own. It's okay. Nobody should wait for the red side to develop. Okay, they should look at opportunities to leverage that. This is where the government and the industry will influence and talk to some of these successful design companies and say, hey, use this India stuff, and then they use it. But they shouldn't wait around. They have the talent and they have the opportunity, and they should figure out a way to become more and more successful as fabulous design houses. I mean, there is no reason why India should not be uh, amongst the best in terms of design houses, because design doesn't take the capital intensity that the red side takes, and design has the right talent and all. And the other thing is, I would say nothing against MNCs, but doing design under the umbrella of MNCs is one thing. But I'm looking for people. I am hoping that there are an increasing number of design companies that have their own umbrella, their own stamp on made by an Indian design company, and with an intent to storm the global market.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Actually, there's a follow-up question. Earlier, one of the rational reasons you gave for choosing between logic and memory was that in terms of the margins. So there's a follow-up question. What do you think should be the strategy when we are talking about whether it's manufacturing or design? Should we be looking at volume, or should we, like you said, be those crazy innovators on the bleeding edge who create this high margin, bleeding edge kind of technologies? I'm assuming it's a combination of both, but the question
Yeah.
is, what is the sweet spot?
Yeah, I was going to answer in that same vein. It's both. Why not both? But I mean, this is a classic thing where Paul Ottolini of Intel writes wrote about how he was so much in love with margins that Intel lost a foothold into the low power wireless phone markets, all that stuff, because we were so used to high margin silicon. And he used to stand up in front of all of us and he used to say the nature of the new world is going to be low margin, high volume. So go for it. And I think even now, if you can make an AI workload optimized cloud computing silicon, you can command a significant amount of margin and you should do it. But at the same time, don't lose opportunities in low margin, high volume. I think it's all of the above, and it's product dependent. I don't know if sweet spots in that whole range can actually be identified with clarity.
Fair enough. I think so. Now there's a lead into a question on the manufacturing space, which is more, you talked about building the ecosystem and you have a certain blocks in your diagram which talks about these are the priority areas we need to focus on. Now, part of creating the ecosystem, you talked about equipment, of course, facilities, etc., materials and foundry services. One of the areas that at IESA also we've been looking at is to see what can India do, not only just to create an ecosystem for itself, but also become a supplier to the global fabs. What are the, becoming part of the supply chain itself? You mentioned earlier becoming not just any player, but a significant player in the value chain. That is by, for example, offering either services or becoming part of the semiconductor manufacturing equipment ecosystem itself. Besides having a fab or an ecosystem in India, how can we support the global market? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. I think IP on the design side, IP seems to be an area where a little more oomph can be placed in the Indian ecosystem to become more valuable. There is a company called Alpha Wave. Um, and I mention this because they are Toronto based, listed now on the London Stock Exchange, run by a person from whom in Intel I bought a company called vSemi, and I was absolutely impressed with the hard focus and boldness with which they created, high speed interconnect IP. And they still are in the business, and they've gone public with, big valuations and stuff. It's just as an example, that is something that India can use and say what kind of IP is going to be most relevant. And in these new emerging areas like AI and autonomy in driving and all that stuff, I have to believe that there are lots of IPs that are high margin and high value, and India can become an IP supplier simply because it has invested in innovation. So there is on the design side, IP would be my favorite to go to for to stir up innovation and therefore a significant position. In terms of a material supply and all, I don't have the knowledge to understand where India could add, but it's an area to think about. Equipment makers, there I would think that a partnership with the AMATs um, and the Japanese equipment suppliers, or I mean, even some European ones, because these days the EUV guys are the most, they are the sexiest equipment supply segment. Um, India could actually say, come set up here and let's do some co-development of certain pieces of the equipment where it's needed. But, the problem there is, where's the expertise? There's greenfield there too, right? There's greenfield. A greenfield effect is not to be taken lightly. But given that caveat, yes, I think I like the question because it pursues an element that says I don't have to be, I don't have to own the entire ecosystem, because I won't. I want to be a part of it, of the global ecosystem. That is the basis of that question, and I like it for that reason.
Yeah. So, Sunit, just to clarify, right, on the equipment makers, since they do have a footprint in India and they aggressively support many of the fabs and ATMPs through their resources who are based out of India. So, we are also been significantly, I would say, pleasantly surprised to learn that a large part of their workforce, which is involved in deployment in both the OSATs, ATMPs, and fabs, are leveraged, many of them in Bangalore, in the companies like Lam Research and, Applied Materials, the ones that you were referring to. But again, there's a other question, follow-up question is, I'm just reading off the attendee list. So how about power devices such as MOSFETs and, basically from the power space? Do you think, that would be a niche area that India can focus on and create some kind of a, I would say, differentiation or innovation is the question?
Yeah, sure. The market is not that big, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't play in that part. One thing that I'm noticing is that as the SOCs become more and more collapsed systems onto the SOC, there is a power problem. And there is a very significant issue with being able to shrink inductors. And I'm actually an advisor to a company that is trying to do a 10x difference in terms of miniaturizing inductors and putting them right next to or inside or above or below the SOC itself and provide us a lot of control over the power management simply because you move the power wells way inside. Those kinds of innovations would be very interesting for India to look at. I'm not saying that exact one, but if you want to play in the power world, there should be some attempt to characterize the low-hanging fruit and then go after that. Um, Not just to make some discrete power components for the sake of being able to satisfy a slogan that says this is make in India. But it is an interesting area. It's not just power. It's silicon photonics. There's the 3-5 materials. Europe, England, Wales specifically is full of this stuff, compound semiconductors. And in fact, even in the Indian government um, announcements, photonics plays a part. I mean, it gets a mention about an area in which we will consider incentivizing. It's an area, and the more we use light to communicate information, the more photonics is going to find its relevance.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity for innovation in various areas. Now, here's a more from a business standpoint question which has come in. Earlier, you mentioned that the current trend in if you look at the overall, geographies, there's a tendency to consolidate, whether it is the larger companies, that was one of the trends that you just talked about, or the currents, or even the countries, they're consolidating. Now, how do you actually maneuver through this consolidation? I know one is for India itself, you talked about focusing on, if you had to choose between memory and logic, choose logic. Don't try to go and sit at the, 65 nanometer and below, but look at the bleeding edge also. Look at volume as well as margin. Consider all of those and build an ecosystem, not just focusing on creating a fab, because creating the ecosystem involves various components. Some are of priority, some are otherwise. All of these are actionable. Now, considering the fact that consolidation is happening, what would be a suggested way forward for India?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing when we have a green field and say, come play. And everybody is saying, hey man, we have our own fields and we want to play because I mean, look at Pat Gelsinger. Every chance he gets, he talks about resilient and essentially saying something that the US can control as opposed to be subject to. It's uh, it's both a challenge as well as an opportunity. I think India plays a role, a very highly respectable role, both because of its talent and because of proven track record of contributions in the high tech world. Uh, Significant reputation we have. So exploiting that and through some partnerships, trying to become relevant in through those partnerships in the world. Um, so therefore, this whole emphasis on it must be built on Indian soil. I mean, for example, think about it. I mean, there's no shortage of very rich companies in India, and some of them are actually applying for government funds and stuff. Maybe you give them these funds and have them acquire assets, not necessarily on Indian soil, but under Indian control. That is a pathway to, maybe not the only pathway. I'm not saying I don't like Indian soil, but practicalities are that you could actually have all kinds of deals between, India and Malaysia, India and Europe, India and the US, that have a mishmash of, India playing a role on some other country's soil, and participating in that consolidation to get upliftment in terms of our understanding and confidence in the area as we move forward. Remember, it's a 50-year thing. It's not a 5-year thing. So, you just do what is necessary for us to become more capable and confident.
Yeah, I think it kind of plays into your earlier comment, which said, if someone came to you and told you that there is any country or company who's completely self-sufficient, they aren't. They have to work with various partners in the ecosystem, industry, governments, and the supply chain and logistics itself. So I think we are just about on the clock. If you have any closing comments, Sunit, because we have a few more questions, but we will send them your way by email, then you can answer them offline because keeping time. But any closing comments you might have?
Well, I'm assuming that most of the audience is a part of Bangalore. And I must say, I have been being part of Bangalore. As I said, I learn every time I come here. What you have built and what you are a part of is just impressive. I just wish I was 30 years younger and playing right here. So I envy you, and keep going. Just keep going. But don't be unbold. Just be bold, be crazy.
Yeah, thank you, Sunit. So just you have an audience pan India right now, not just Bangalore. It's all of ISA's members from across India. But with those closing comments, I think we really enjoyed because I'm seeing a lot of comments which are coming on the side. Many of them want to spend more time with you, but keeping time in mind. And also, I think what helped was the clarity that you have in terms of your observations. At least you have a position on what needs to be done. I think that is very helpful, and we are also in the same boat as you in terms of our optimism to crack this, whether it is to not just setting up fabs, but basically creating an ecosystem which will support the global semiconductor industry. And I think that is the goal, and that is the current, I would say, uh, uh, wave that is happening. And we look forward to your support and guidance as we go forward. So thank you again for taking the
Yeah.
time. Thank you very much. And we look forward to meeting you this evening again. Thank you, Sunit.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.